Welcome to a special meeting of the Board of School Directors uh, around enrollment growth and facilities. Before I turn the meeting over to Mr. Copeland and the administration, I want to provide some background and context for this evening's meeting. Tonight's meeting is not a formal business meeting, but rather a special meeting of the board to continue the ongoing discussion related to the expansion of facilities in response to the unprecedented increase in student enrollment in the district. As you might recall, we've had a number of similar meetings of this nature, the most recent being a presentation and discussion of demographic and enrollment studies from the Montgomery County Planning Commission and Sundance this past November 2016. Tonight's meeting will be organized much like our board committee meetings, where we invite extensive dialogue and discussion among the board and the administration. We also encourage members of the public to raise questions as well as provide feedback and commentary for the board to consider as we move closer to making decisions informed by district core values, which include maintaining current academic, co-curricular, and extracurricular programming and class size targets, while being mindful of ongoing district fiscal constraints. This meeting will consider enrollment and facilities issues in all 10 schools. However, there will be some emphasis on Penguin Elementary and Ballard Kenwood Middle, as these campuses likely require expansion within the next 2 years, based on the demographers' projections. I want to reiterate that the board was reminded of the community values, particularly during the strategic planning and superintendent search processes. The board takes the values of small class size, maintaining and enhancing curricular programming, and attending neighborhood elementary schools very seriously, and thoughtfully considers them in each of our decisions along with the related costs. While we will not make any decisions tonight, we will gather information for future decisions. We also invite the public to send feedback and comments to the board and administration at communitycomments@lmsd.org. In terms of protocol, I would like to ask that we hold broader questions and comments until the end of the presentation. However, if there are clarifying questions from the board or the public, you're welcome to ask them. I'll now turn the meeting over to Mr. Copeland.
Thank you, Dr. Van Lynch. Good evening, everyone. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. The presentation that I'm going to go through tonight is available on board docs, so if it's easier for either members of the board or members of the public to call that up on their tablets or iPhones, you have that available, so that's live this evening. Also, because this is being recorded and will end up on our website, I'd ask that anybody who has a comment to please make it in a microphone so that it can be picked up. As Dr. Van Lynch has said, I suppose one of the things I should have done before coming tonight was catalog the number of these meetings that we've had in the last year and a half. I didn't go back into my archives to find out, but I know it's been a number of them, and I think it's been helpful to help shape some decisions that the board may make. In addition to these, we've had a number of community outreach meetings which have really been fruitful. Had some just last week, and so this is not something new. Neither is the fact that the Lower Merion School District is growing in its enrollment. This was not something that took anybody by surprise. There's been a steady growth over the last 10 years and over the last 8 years of over 1,400 students. How to handle that growth is what is a vexing issue that we deal with as a board, administration, and a community. So when it comes to addressing the future enrollment needs, there's no such thing as a perfect option or an easy option to achieve. There's always going to be a balance, particularly in a community that values, as Dr. Van Lynch said, the core values of the system, but also doesn't have an endless amount of either resources or land in which to deal with the enrollment. The country, state, even the township in which we live are ever changing. And so trying to find a perfect calculus for just do these 5 things, add them up, parentheses, order of operations, and go, is unlikely to take place. I use this graph as really an opportunity to just say, you know, from 1929 to 2015, there were ebbs and flows. There's a world war. There were baby boomers. Some of us are proud to be in that group. Some of us are not proud to be in that group, but we're either there or not there. And all the way to the baby boomers' grandchildren, which they're calling a baby boomlet. And so the result of that is going to be felt in communities across the United States. Recessions, changes in what we do. Through the course of, I know that the board has had a number of different demographic studies. The last demographic study we had presentations in the fall of 2016. The board approved the recommendation of the administration to hire not one but two demographers to work independent of one another so that we could triangulate to the best of our ability the unusual enrollment growth to see if they agreed, and if they didn't agree, why they didn't agree, so that we could make some of the best decisions we can. I'm not going to repeat all of those presentations, but I will go over some in short order. Generally speaking, our elementary enrollments, they seem to come to the agreement that they may have leveled off. The line in red is Sundance Associates. That was George Sundell. The line in blue is a Montgomery County Planning Commission. And you can see that the trend tends to agree, but the one demographer is showing perhaps a higher growth than the other in the elementary schools. And part of the variation is building by building. So here you can see in Gladwin, one demographer sees a higher number, the other one a lower. In Marion, one sees it's just the opposite. The trend tends to be the same. The difference is what we're obviously concerned about. Not so in the case of middle school projections. So what's happening in Lower Marion is quite different than you would normally see in a lot of districts. In a lot of districts, particularly with half-day kindergarten, the surprise is usually a kindergarten and first grade. Number of parents will send their children to an out-of-district first grade program and then bring them back into the district, kindergarten program, bring them back into the district in first grade. You never know how many that's going to be in. So that in-migration is a bit of a guess. Same thing with kindergarten. We experience that, to be sure, but we also experience an in-migration at the secondary level. I don't have any empirical data to explain why. It could be independent school tuitions rise. It could be that the cost of housing is such that people tend to have older kids when they move into the community. For whatever reason, we seem to get an in-migration at the secondary level that far outpaces that at the elementary. So the demographers are cautioning that the real growth we're going to see is middle school, and there you can see it's a very tight, and there in the high school, it's almost identical projections going forward. Now, in the fall of 2015, our architects, Gilbert Architects, and Mr. Tom Gilbert, the principal from that firm, is here with us this evening, as is Damian Spar, who works with us in terms of construction management, was asked to do a complete program for us in facilities. And what I'm going to show you is a snapshot of that report in 2015. This is being updated as we speak. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because from time to time, people will go on our website, look at this study, and they'll say, well, it looks like if you use PDE is short for Pennsylvania Department of Education. Forgive me, I live in a world of initials, and sometimes I forget to make them into English. But PDE is the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And they give a capacity for school buildings. But here's the caution I would use. The caution is that the PDE numbers have not changed since 1973. 1973. And these numbers, as has been explained to me, were really about a funding formula and how to make a determination as to how much money school districts would get. So if someone were to say to me, well, PDE says you've got lots of room, Well, I would debate that because it's a formula for funding, and I would debate it because it was a formula derived in 1973. Maybe, arguably, you could say this is a good thing in 1973. A Ford Galaxy was about $3,800. Morton dinner I looked up was 36 cents. Things have changed since 1973. In fact, you know, so they're using a figure of about 90% capacity. We're using, for our middle schools, 85% capacity. I checked just to double check with our architects. Is this customary and usual? It is customary and usual, so there's nothing mysterious about that. They're in the process of updating this. So when you see this new capacity study, you'll see a chart like this. Now what's happened is, in order to make the program do the things that we want it to do, we've created rooms. Now, before I got here, I think there was a renovation of some physical education space. There were some classrooms that were added in the last 2 or 3 years. Mr. Ganan, I'm looking at you. Is that correct?
That's correct. They were added through interior renovation.
So you're going to see an increase of capacity. And you'll see that as we move along throughout a number of the buildings in Lower Merion. So what do we look at? We look at capacity considerations. We look at the class size. How many students do you want in a classroom? The programs, such as team teaching or laboratory sciences in the secondary school, how do you want those handled? Do you want kids in overcrowded situations? Do you want middle schools to be treated as small high schools, or do you want them to remain with the character that we currently have? Special needs students. 1973 was 2 years before 94-192, which is now the Individuals with Disabilities Act. So the issue of special education law was 2 years after these capacity studies were dealt with. Unanticipated growth. We don't know for sure how many people are going to come into a community. The current site plan, and as you'll see tonight, or we'll speak about, 2 of our schools have challenges around the site plan, and of course the budget. How much dollars do we have to spend? Some facts about multifamily developments. There was a time, a short 10, 11 years ago, when there were about 249 students from multiple family units. Now that number is 3 times the size, almost 3 times the size of 626. Now I asked Megan Schaefer to summarize her findings when she took a look at the demographic studies and compared them with some other kinds of things. Megan, could you just speak to this slide?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. In looking at both the study of the Montgomery County Planning Commission as well as the Sundance study and sort of isolating the conversation or the information that they provided around multifamily developments, as Mr. Copeland first pointed out, there has been a growth in our students that are coming from multifamily developments. That 626 number was updated in January using our transportation software. So I also looked at those numbers in comparison to the overall growth. So back in 2006, we had approximately 6,950 students, which was, so 3.6% of our students were coming from multifamily developments, whereas today we have almost 7.5% coming from multifamily developments with that 626 number. Interestingly, with both of the studies, well, as we pointed out earlier, the outcomes were relatively in the same ballpark. One area where there was discrepancy was in the area of new construction and the impact on enrollment moving forward, particularly the multiplier they used. So I just pointed that out, and I won't go into all of the details around that. I wouldn't be able to explain it with the depth that probably is required. But I did isolate those years where we're looking at a similar universe of new developments. And as you can see, for Sundance, during that year, those years 2017 to 2020, you have, as a result of those new developments coming online, an additional 235 students they're projecting, whereas with MCPC, they're projecting only 70 students, approximately 70 students from those units. That being said, even if you look at the total new students during that time period, and that 844 number actually comes from using the highest projected enrollment, so it's sort of a combined figure between the two studies. You can see that the new development may attribute to somewhere between 8 and 28% of overall growth during that time period, so a low end of 8% up to 28%.
Thank you, Megan. So you can see that we're in a situation where we're trying to use the best information we have to make the best decisions that we can. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to really review some of the options that we've been talking about for the last year and a half. Now, coming up within the next month or so, we're going to produce a fairly extensive strategic plan for facilities that will involve obviously what our facilities are, but also what our wants are in terms of programs. Part of that will be to look back over the last year and a half at the different kinds of things that we've had a discussion on. Some of you in the audience or folks who are watching this at home at a later date will say, well, I've heard some of this before, and you have, but I just want to, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I just want to take you through this to remind everyone about some of the things that we've discussed and looked at as possibilities. One of the strategies was what we called elementary school neighborhood stabilization. And we were looking at this when we were seeing what was supposed to be a large amount of growth in our elementary schools. We were very concerned about that. Now, the demographers are saying, you know, it looks like you may have hit a peak. You're not going down in elementary school any time, but you may have hit a peak. And so, but at the time, we were looking at neighborhood stabilization to say, what would it be like if we just kept the current attendance lines and people stayed in the current attendance zones? And you can see some of the advantages, but you can also see some of the challenges in terms of very large elementary schools and so forth. And I'll come back to this slide, but this gives you an example of some of the complexities. I don't expect anybody to look at this with any specificity. That's a map of the district, and everywhere there's a black dot, that's where students are. And so you can see that there's a significant amount of density as you move to the eastern part of the district and some sparse population as you move away. So looking at the neighborhood stabilization, you can see there that this was studied and is still being studied extensively about what we may want to do. Another strategy was to add an additional 500 student elementary school. And again, this was at a time when there was a lot of concern about the growth of the elementary school enrollment. In order to do that, we would reduce the construction needs of other elementary schools, use the property that we currently already have, where the St. Justin's Church is, right next to Welsh Valley Middle School. The major challenge, besides two major challenges. One, the site would only hold about 550 students. So the site it's not a large acreage. And another challenge is in terms of the actually populating the school. So here's that same map, and if you see the white arrow, which I was supposed to make red, and I forgot, but you see the white arrow point, that's the St. Justin site. So the challenge is getting students into that site. If Penn Wynne has a lot of students, Penn Wynne is at the bottom of the, let's see if I can get right there. Penn Wynne is there. You'd be moving students from Penn Wynne either into Penn Valley and into Marion, and then students out of Penn Valley or other schools into this school. So it's what's called cascading. Moving kids in, moving kids out, a huge amount of disruption for the district. So that's a downsize. Another thought was a third 5 through 8 middle school. And I must admit I initially was sort of, really? But the truth of it is, it makes a lot of sense. If there were a third 5 through 8 middle school, you would relieve the pressure on all the elementary schools and negate some of the building that you'd have to do, particularly at Ballackinwood, which is already in a challenged site situation. The problem is we need about 20 acres. I had been saying 15 to 20 acres. Mr. Gannan reminded me. We started to look at Ballackinwood. I think you said Ballackinwood was about on 19 acres. So you probably need at least 20 acres. Finding 20 acres in Lower Merion has been a challenge. We have been working with a realtor. We have not been able to find any properties that are on the market. Folks have said, well, you can condemn certain properties. The problem with condemnation is, even if the board had an appetite for that, you could spend 5, 6, 7 years in court dealing with the cost of that, of the expense. Bottom line is, I'm saying to the board, I'm beginning to run out of possibilities for the third middle school, but it did provide some real opportunities and thought at one time. We also looked at converting Ballackinwood and Welsh Valley into 5-8 middle schools to relieve the number of students. Problem with that is you've got now 2 middle schools virtually the same size as Harriton and Lower Merion High School. That's a lot of middle school students, and it puts an enormous strain on the facilities. It costs a lot of money, and the neighborhood of Ballackinwood would, well, I think both neighborhoods would not be in the best of shape with 1,600, 1,700 students in those schools. So we somewhat rejected that, but we did take a look at it. Expanding, redistricting of elementary schools and an expanded capacity at some schools. That's a little bit of redistricting and a little bit of construction. So expand in a few places and redistrict in some others. It reduces the impact of Penn Win, but it also moves some of the issues to other schools. And again, you get the large elementary schools, pretty strong price tag. Another strategy was to expand the current middle schools, and as you'll see, we're beginning to look at this more seriously in combination with some other efforts. One I don't want to forget was the kindergarten center, was to remove kindergarten from the elementary schools. 2 problems with that. We have a half-day kindergarten program, so you don't really gain very many classrooms when you do that, and you all but create a 4th tier of busing in order to get the school up and running. That was a significant expense for that. And an 8th strategy was to make sure we took a look at our high school expansions. Now, this has been partly done because Lower Merion High School, we opened up this year classes on the 3rd floor of the administration building. The science labs are there, and so that's partially been taken care of. But if the projections are correct, at some point Harriton is going to be catching up, and we're going to have to take a look at some expansions there. So, I'm getting towards the end. What we want to do tonight, I think, is at least talk about some possibilities. And these possibilities are what would happen if we finally come to the point where there's no third 5 through 8 middle school. What would we do? Because we have some things that are coming up. Ballackinwood Middle School is going to outgrow its needs in the upcoming school year. The additional students, we would have some serious program implications if we did that. Mr. Potton is here, the principal of the school. He's done, I think, at least 2 presentations for the board. We did a walkthrough with some members of the HSA and some commissioners and board members this morning. I think everybody walked away with the understanding that Ballackinwood Middle School expansion is necessary. And we'll be looking at about 12 classrooms and the expansion of the cafeteria. At Welsh Valley, because there's been a recent expansion, we think at this point Welsh Valley can make do with just some expansion of the cafeteria. Penn Win Elementary School, where we currently have modulars in place, If there's not going to be a third middle school, we think we need to move ahead with the Penn Wynne Elementary School expansion. Arnold Field, this was something that had been looked on. This is the Lower Merion High School Athletic Center. This has been something the district has been discussing for some time. And then Harriton High School expansion, if we're going to provide the same kind of support to Harriton High School that we provided to Lower Merion. In order to do this, we have to develop a financial plan. And what we have now is we're budgeting about $28.2 million every year for our mortgage, basically, our debt service. And that would be retired probably totally retired, I think it's about 2036, Mr. Orlando? 2036. But by 2026, we see a drop-off, is it 2026? Substantially, and we will go down. If we were going to build a third middle school, we would not be able to retire the debt that fast, because we would have to buy the land and then build the building. So what we were looking to do is, how could we finance a situation that would retire the debt in about the same time, but still provide us with some bond issuance ability to be able to do some of the things that we need to do. So the financial plan is to issue bonds in 3 phases of about $10 million each. It's called a tight wrap financing strategy. We have $15 million in committed capital fund balance now. Putting the two together, we would have about $45 million. Mr. Orlando, could you just briefly summarize that?
Sure. As Mr. Copeland stated, so we're looking to issue bonds in 3 phases of $10 million each. One option to consider is what's called a wraparound, in this case known as a tight wrap. And what that will be is, when the bond payments or the debt service payments decline, those funds will be redirected to pay for the new debt service. And then we have $15 million in our fund balance committed for future capital projects. So when you add those two together, that becomes up $45 million that we have for the construction.
And that would retire our bonds at about the same time as we were planning?
That is correct.
Okay, good. So what would this cost? Ballard Kennywood's expansion, if we did 12 classrooms, $11 million. You can see the cost there. Just let me explain the Penn Wynne. There are 2 options. Option 1, about $9.5 million. But if you did option 2, which is to take down a section of Penn Wynne and build 12 classrooms, classrooms on top of that, the 6 that you tear down and 6 more, retaining green space, so it's a difference of about $5 million. This is a construction schedule somewhat in the mind of Mr. Ganan, but the parameters are there. But that doesn't necessarily say when the board makes the decision. So, for example, if the board made a decision, we're not suggesting the board wait till January 2019 to make a decision on Penn Wynne. You make it earlier. You move back to construction schedule. Okay. Here's some of my concerns. This is out of my head, and what keeps me up at night. Some unintended consequences. The demographers agree that our elementary enrollment has peaked. What if they're wrong? Last week, we had our second annual breakfast meeting with realtors, and they've been a real source of information for me, what's going on in the community. They talked about the number of flips that are going on in the community, turning older houses into, those HGTV granite-filled things that folks seem to like, and they're selling, and they're concerned, they may be selling and moving with students. There's a significant divergence on the impact of new housing construction. What if the enrollment exceeds even the larger estimate? We're always concerned about legislative unfunded mandates. They're always changing. And again, additional students will result in additional buses. Mr. Orlando gave me this slide, this is the history of properties that were considered and evaluated to park buses over the last several years.
This goes back to probably 2012 through, let's say 14. These are some of the, I think, 30-something properties that we looked at.
So that's where we are. We think this is at least a good place to stop and move to a discussion and dialogue.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll open up the floor now for questions from the board. I'll start to my left. Body? Mr. Fetterman?
Just thanks for the presentation. I have questions right this second.
Sure. Anybody else? Ms. Ackman?
I think a lot of us and folks in the community are wondering about the impact, as you spoke to, on multifamily, on student growth. So can you talk a little bit about the discrepancies? I know it's on your list of things that keep you up at night, but how you're thinking about this as we move forward?
Well, you know, if you, both of the demographers' reports are online. They're both, I think, quality folks in their field. Mr. Sundell uses a different set of assumptions than Montgomery County Planning Commission. He uses a more of a national approach. He gave us a higher figure. What keeps me up is not having a real sense as to what somebody might do in the future. If folks decide that, for instance, I don't know what interest rates are going to do. They've been at historic lows for a period of time. I read, you know, the Journal and others, and, you know, it looks like interest rates are going to go up. It looks like inflation may go up. You would think that may stop somebody from buying a house, but then investment dollars go up. One of some of the realtors are, again, they're saying that we've got a mixed situation. Our proximity to Center City and the quality of the school system is bringing people in at a fairly quick rate. Another realtor said, and the population of Philadelphia is growing. And so those things, you know, obviously create concern.
One thing we may want to look at, and perhaps with the township's help, I know the township is mindful of trying to do infill near trains and, you know, leveraging our walkable communities. But one thing perhaps that could give us some budget relief is how many of these new multifamily dwellings are within a walk zone of a school. So maybe, you know, it wouldn't implicate additional buses, which is another way that growth adds cost. So that could be something maybe we look at with the township over time, just to get a sense of the true full impact of the growth on our operations.
Please, Dr. Gilbert.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of different questions. I know this is a summary of a lot of data that we've gone over in public over the last probably close to 2 years at this point. And I do have very serious concerns about the implications for buses. So I'd like to see how many, not tonight, but I'd like to see another analysis. We've had them done before of how many buses we're going to need. And since, you know, we weren't able to locate buses on a non-school property, I mean, we're going to be into the situation of having to do it on school properties probably, and that's going to implicate how many classrooms we can have on those properties, for example. So I feel like that has to be sort of, you know, presented along with this. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the core facility, the core spaces. So I know that we've talked about, sorry, I'm running back and forth between the, give me 1 second. We've talked about Welsh Valley, which we've already added significant number of classrooms at Welsh Valley, but having, and actually at that time we also improved the space for, the sort of health, the nursing and health services, which was just incredibly cramped prior to that renovation. So we've done that, but I know the cafeteria is a concern there, and I know there's issues at Penguin and obviously Valley Kenwood Middle School. How are we doing on the other schools in terms of core facility spaces? In other words, I mean, we've done renovations, we've done additions. We did it at Gladwin, we did it at Penn Valley. We've been doing this now. It feels like almost endlessly at this point, frankly. But what do you feel confident based on the current projections, which I realize could shift? That's why we keep doing new studies every year, because we want to stay on top of this. But based on that, do we see the core facilities at the other elementary schools as being good enough to, in fact, support the programs that we want to support?
I think the short answer is no, and I'm going to look at Mr. Ganand for some specifics here. Pat, I know over the last several years, in order to make the elementary program work, different schools have had to give up large group instruction spaces, they've had to give up music rooms, they've had to give up art rooms, and so forth. And I thank you for the question, Dr. Gill, because that's one of the things that when folks say to me, well, the numbers are peaked, you don't really need, yeah, the numbers are peaked at a level at which we've had to give up some spaces.
Well, I just also remind people that we took MELC out of the elementary schools to deal, or, we've been dealing with our space being an issue for a long time now. And so there's not a lot, there's not a lot more you can do in terms of repurposing space, so in that sense.
No, and one of the reasons why we went to the partner schooling, where students are moving in new, is because of the concern about losing some of that core space. I mean, sure, even if you wanted to, you're starting to run out of even possibilities at Kenwood and some other schools. I know we produced some core space documentation about where our status is. Pat, can we bring that back to the board at some point and just say, here's where we are with all the core space? I don't want to talk off the top of my head, but we can provide you with that.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Thanks. Questions on this side? Dr. O'Leary? Start at the end.
I volunteered you.
Thanks. On particularly page 19, when you went through the different strategies, there were dollar signs at the bottom in the last line. And I just wondered how we were to use these, because I don't understand the projected costs for strategy 6.
Okay. The cost for strategy 6, I'll turn to Mr. Spar and Mr. Ganand.
So when whoever made these slides, were you considering costs around the district, or were they costs for a specific project, or what are we looking at here?
I think when you look at these strategies, you're going to have to combine strategies to find the total solution. So, for example, strategy 6 is only designed to alleviate or solve problems at the middle school level.
Okay, but the middle school construction is more than this number. Is this an older number, or am I just reading?
Right, I think that number that you see there in strategy 6 assumed we'd have to add additional classrooms at Welsh Valley.
I see, but it doesn't include the cost of Penguin or other things that
No,
would
it's only
have to
middle
go
school.
on?
It's only
Okay.
middle school.
Okay. So that number would be much higher if you include other elementary school and high school construction that would have to go along with it? Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Mr. Driscoll?
thank you very much for the presentation. And obviously, we have a little bit more to churn through as we get this together, but thank you very much. My question, I think Pat may have just answered it, though, is even though there's a total of 8 strategies, it's not we're not doing all 8. It's more we might do one,
Yeah.
strategy number 1 plus strategy number 5 plus some combination thereof. Yes.
Which is what we presented at the end. I hesitated to say, here's number 9, because it's grabbing from different things based on, these all came about prior to the demographic numbers that we got this fall. So my purpose of this was just sort of remind folks about the dialogue that's taken place in the past. And what we did was we took a look at this and said, okay, you know, I have grave concerns that we've reached our peak in elementary. But I have nothing to go on. These gentlemen have provided some scientific data that suggests one thing. I have some concerns just based on a feel for what's going on out there. But if you accept that and the definite number, because most but not all of the secondary students are here, not all, because some of the projections in secondary school are accounted for by that in-migration. So that's what we've got when we take a look at it.
And if I just have another, I think Pat actually, or it's actually Dr. Gilbert's question of, as we go forward, you know, the recent history of things we've done inside the buildings, because obviously when we do major construction outside, that tends to be more public. We go to the Board of Commissioners for approval. There's more meetings. Converting a room internally can be done simpler. And I think, you know, at least in my 3 years of being here, I can't tell you how much of that we've done, but it seems we've done some here, some there. Dr. Gilbert's MELC has been, you know, asked to leave. You know, and I feel like today that we've pretty much done all we can do, or most of what we can do inside the envelopes of the buildings we have. And it's now time, having exhausted that, we got to go outside the current envelope of some of our buildings.
And there's been some substantial, as you mentioned, growth outside the buildings. When we presented the preliminary budget a short while ago, one of the slides showed not just the construction of the 2 high schools, but the number of additions at Gladwin, Penn Valley, and so forth. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You want to follow up?
Yeah, because I think it's important that, you know, everyone understands over a period of time what's actually been done here. Because, you know, there was a big discussion over how many classrooms to add at Welsh Valley. There was some discussion of adding even more classrooms than we actually added at that time. You know, and I think I think it's important for people to understand where we're at inside in terms of how we're utilizing space, because it's not ideal. There's a lot of tight spaces. There's a lot of, you know, whatever, art on a cart. There's, you know, my understanding is that there are rooms that have been closets that are now offices. I mean, it's not, from what you've reported before and previous superintendents as well, that it's not that we're in a situation where there's a lot, you know, that it's the ideal situation for us, right, from a programmatic perspective. And so, you know, one of the concerns that I have is that, you know, if we're going to do these things, you know, would you rather end up being slightly over capacity or slightly under capacity? It's very hard to get it exactly right. And if you're slightly over capacity, you know, that might mean you can take art off of a cart, or it might mean even down the line that you could bring MELC back into the elementary schools, which I think would be the preference for most elementary parents, would be to have that service in the school. So I just think it's very important, and perhaps that we could give that, I know we've done that before, that presentation, but I think it's very helpful to hear from the principals in terms of what it's actually, you know, what is going on. And I think, you know, at the elementary level, many parents are in the schools on a regular basis. I mean, I know, you know, when my kids were in elementary school, I was in the school a lot. You know, now that they're in secondary school, nobody wants me anywhere near the school anymore, so I'm sure everybody's experienced that. But, you know, you have less of a sense, whereas I think in the elementary schools, parents have a pretty clear sense of, you know, how the space is being utilized and what the issues are.
Sure.
But I think for parents at the secondary level, it's not so easy to see.
I'm going to ask, and you can go to the school, you just have to wear a mask. But sneak in. You go to disguise, right? Mr.
Something I don't know.
Well, because you said, Mr. Bernardowitz, what, if you don't mind coming to the microphone, what accommodations have you made so far?
Oh, good evening. Just as I was sitting there, I started jotting down notes, and so it's just the ones that jump out, the big ones for me at least. The large group instruction room went away, and that became 2 classrooms. The computer lab went away, that became a classroom. The closet, it's truth. Our string instructor currently works in what used to be our storage for our cafeteria tables. Mr. Gannon and his people went out and found a system that we could actually make the tables disappear into the walls. That freed up a closet that has been our string instructor's instructional space for the past 2 years. We had, if you're familiar with my building, it's a big rectangle, and we had a hallway that cut through the middle right behind the library. That got converted into 3 instructional spaces. So we took a hallway and converted it into 3 spaces that we use for small group instruction. Art and the music went on a cart. They were taught in the classrooms this year with the modular classroom and some cooperation with my colleagues. We've been able to schedule strategically to bring the art and music people in when there's a room available. So we've been able to get them into a room this year in one of the 4 modular classrooms. And again, the MELC was very early in my tenure here, was in the building and went away rather quickly.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Jason, I know you've made some accommodations at Ballackinwood. Just
Good evening. A couple of years ago with the expansion that we did, we took away our large group instruction room, which was room 100. We also lost the wrestling room. And what that did was we had to buy mats to then use the gym space for wrestling practice, which takes away space for some of the other teams. We also converted 2 locker rooms in the classrooms, which again took locker space away from some of the the athletic teams. In addition, in terms of looking forward, we are going to lose 4 computer labs that are going to be converted into classrooms and put computers, sort of make them mobile. That includes a music computer lab, and that's even with the addition of the portable classrooms. That's even with that addition. So.
thank you.
Just add on to that, I think sort of watching some of that happen, it's been really impressive that the staff has looked at those changes as opportunities. I think they've been really creative with a lot of the spaces. And I think that was part of the impetus for the high school to go to Lunch and Learn. It was, a change that they looked upon as an opportunity and really turned it into a fabulous program. So all of those changes have not been negatives. I think the administration's done a really good job of turning those into opportunities also.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Robinson?
Not at the moment.
Ms. Pollard? Okay. I wanted to ask about the programmatic piece, particularly with Ballackinwood Middle School, the teaming model, and some of the challenges with potentially compromising that with lack of space. Could you talk a bit about that as well, Mr. Potton? And another thank you for the presentation for the group this morning, the tour of the school, as well as discussion around what our real needs are programmatically for Ballackinwood Middle.
As I've presented before, when we look at middle school and we think about middle school and program, teaming is really sort of an essential core. And as I've stated, it's been found to be so beneficial for students that our high schools have adopted it, both at the 9th and 10th grade in their buildings. What that teaming is really looking at, one, in terms of facilities-wise, where you cluster students. So where are your team of teachers located near each other, as well as both common planning time for the team, so they can have those team meetings where they're just talking about kids. What without adding additional space, what it does is it forces us to schedule classes, so to say, when those rooms are empty, and it doesn't allow for that common planning time and does not allow for those teams or groups to be clustered. So it sort of eliminates those opportunities to come together really and talk about kids in terms of what their needs are and how we're best supporting them. So.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board at this time? Please, Mr. Driscoll.
Bob, would you mind flipping to slide 3? It's the enrollment from, that's the slide. I know there's a lot of new faces here, because with this slide we saw when the demographers were here in November, and I had asked the question, you know, you look at 1968-69, we had over 10,000 students. And I asked the demographers, here it is 2016-17, we have more housing units today in Lower Merion and Narberth than we had 40 years ago. So my question was to them, with more housing units, how much more growth are we going to see? And they're both, my recollection, at least one if not both, said, yes, you have more housing units, be they single family, detached, whatever. However, they're seeing that the trends of demography is people had 3, 4, 5 kids per family back in the 60s. Apparently, this is what they said. Today, 1, 2, 3 is more of the average of what we're seeing. So you can have more housing units, but fewer kids per house than we saw. I want to emphasize that, because for me, one of the issues I keep wrestling with is I hear people say, you know, oh, I want the schools to be the way they were, and I kind of want to say the township isn't what it was 40 years ago, even on a individual family basis of having 2 kids versus 4 kids as an average. There's probably a dozen other things. You know, how many automobiles did we have? How much driving did we do? Was taking the train more in vogue then than it is today? I don't know these things, but I think trying to hold on to what we have, while very admirable, and we should make efforts to keep some of it, is going to be, we're fighting gravity almost. We are not the same township, Narberth, we were 40, 50 years ago, and we're going to have to change with it as best we can. And to Dr. Van Lynch's point, the one thing I don't want to compromise is our quality of programming. I think I'm willing to change a lot of things, not that. And I think that we really need to focus on the kids first. You know, I argue over buildings more than I care to, but it's kids first. You know, buildings need to work for the kids, not the other way around. We got to make that happen for us. So thank you.
Okay, so I have another question. Ms. Schaefer talked about slide 11 around the percentage that our demographers gave us in terms of students to expect from new multifamily developments, 8% to 28%. What is the conversation that we're having as an administration around where do we fall in that? Are we looking at the full 28%? Are we looking somewhere in the middle? You know, I'd like to have some dialogue around how we best plan given that large variance.
So one of the things, it's a problem.
Yes.
I was trying to think of what to say when Mr. Driscoll was talking about families having 3, 4 kids, and they're not going to have that anymore. I want some guarantee that that's going to be the case. To a certain degree, we're going to have to wait and see. That's one thing, because you're talking about rental housing, which means by nature, people aren't sticking roots down so much, and so you never know where they're going to go. And the second thing is, one of the things that I've asked the administration to do is the board has a policy that says that you can, I think it's before the facility is open, make some decisions about where students go from that. I've asked Ms. Schaefer to take a look at that, because I may be coming back to you and saying, we may be asking you to make different decisions even after the facility has opened, because we're concerned that where we anticipated it was not going to have an impact, it may have an impact.
Mr. Copeland, can you also, to that point, follow up on the partner schooling and give us an update, given that that policy was established as a response to large numbers of our students coming from multifamily units
Sure.
or as I guess single family as well, but ensuring that we aren't overcrowding our
And luckily, we
schools.
didn't have to employ it very much this past school year, but in essence, what had taken place, and I'll pick, I think it's second grade is 22 students, was the target grade. So what traditionally happened in the school district is, in a given school, let's say they had 4 second grade classrooms, and they all had 22 students in it. When the next kid moved in, that was the 23rd kid, and then the next kid moved in was the 23rd, and the next kid moved in was the 23rd. If the next kid moved in, they created 5 classrooms. Now, what that did was that dropped below the target population, the number of students. The second thing it did is you had to find another room, generally a core facility, and you had to hire a teacher and produce all the material and so forth and so on for that class to be a fully functioning class. Administration went to the board and said, and asked to consider a policy that said, when that next kid moves in, when the class moves to n+1, n meaning the target number +1, when it goes to n+2, that student, if they weren't a walker within a walk zone, would go to a partner school where there was space. Because remember, when you broke up the class and you went down, there was all kinds of spaces within there that you couldn't necessarily make use of in that current school. So as a result, you had some schools where they opened a space, you had extra room. We went back into the summer of 2015 and said, if we'd had partner schooling, there's probably 3 classes we would not have opened up in the district, saving about $300,000 in terms of hiring teachers and saving the facility. We also purchased some vans for transportation so that we would be able to, if need be, provide the transportation for students to go to the partner school because there wouldn't necessarily be a bus. So the planning took place. We only had a few this year. You know, knock on wood, we have a few this time, but that policy, as the board will remember, I said, my recommendation was, let's see how that plays out. Let's see if that will help us in facilities as well as budget.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions? Please, please.
Bob, we talk a little bit about redistricting in various phases throughout some of the strategies. It's been my understanding that the school district has had a history of grandfathering redistricting in. So even if we were to decide to redraw borders today, if you're a 3rd grader in your school, you will be a 4th grader and a 5th grader in your home school. It's just the new kindergartners and maybe the new kids coming in would not necessarily be in that school. What's your sense on grandfathering?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, we haven't been quite that generous. So that you might look at if it's a K-5 school, you might say 4th and 5th grade maybe. But if Lower Merion's history has been, if you stayed there, you get to stay there. Then you're talking about a number of years before you can really do what you want to do. My sense is if that's been the practice in the district, that makes redistricting that much harder. I mean, I understand why you'd want to do it. A student is started in the school, you don't want to disrupt them. And then there's also the sibling issue, so that you don't have parents in 2 different schools. That makes the redistricting a very long implementation.
Just to be clear, though, so that people understand, there's no way you could redistrict our way out of this without building someplace. There's no building that's
got a lot of empty space.
That's got a lot of empty
Yeah.
space. I just want people to understand that.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. Unless you build on to some of the other buildings. So for instance, Penn Win, which is showing some growth, if you took the students out of Penn Win and put them into Marion or Penn Valley, assuming that those are the closest schools, you probably have to build onto those schools.
Okay, any additional questions? So we want to move to public comment at this time. Mr. Orlando, are you? Oh, is Doug? Okay, if you could please come in and sign up with Mr. Young, and we'll do our best to not cut off questions and comments. But we want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak should they so choose. Do we have anyone on the list so far?
No.
No. Anyone interested in providing public comment around enrollment growth and facilities? We invite you to sign up with Mr. Young. If you could, after you sign up, come to the mic and let us know your name and generally where you reside in the district. And again, we'll try to be as flexible as possible given the number of folks that sign up in terms of the time. So. Please.
Hi, my name is Mabel Haggerty, and I do live in Penn Win, and I have a question. I'm sorry, that's my monitor going on. I have a question about the existing school that's in Narberth. Is it St. Justin's? I think I heard comment that there was capacity for about 500 or so students in that building that the school district owns. I'm wondering, because that seems to me like it does encompass the entirety of one of the smaller elementary schools that we already have. If we were able to update that, how would that not help in easing the crunch on the rest of the elementary schools that are trying to take the burden right now? Yep, I'm sorry. Yeah, that one. The white arrow, is that right? So go ahead, please. Sorry.
No, so one of the things that I was discussing is, first of all, it's not a school there, it's a church.
Right.
So it would have to be completely taken down, and you'd have to build a structure there. As you can see on the map, it's not very densely populated right now. So this is, in order to get the number of students in there, assuming you didn't simply transport students from one end of the district all the way to the other.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You wanted to go the shortest distance. In order to make it work, you'd have to build the school there, and then you'd have to move students from, let's say, Penn Valley, which is the, I don't know, mustardy.
Yeah, the other yellow.
Let me do it this way.
It's that yellow versus the limey yellow, right?
You'd have to move students from here into here, and then students from here into here. So you'd be cascading students in to get that school filled.
Is there a financial implication to the cascading, or is it truly it takes too long, it's something that so many neighborhoods don't want? I guess I'm just trying to understand better how negative that option is.
I don't know. I mean, the overall cost is the overall cost. I think we figured it out, Damien, about $40 million to build. 46 to 50.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
And then you still have to take care of the,
the
middle schools and so forth and so on.
Okay.
It's really, it's the level of disruption you feel is tolerable within the district.
Okay. My last question is, I know way back when the architects came in and did give very detailed discussions about everything down to the window details of option 1 that was, forgive me, I think 9.5 million. And then option 2, which we think is...
Are you talking about Penn Win?
Yes, okay. Sorry, Penn Win. Option 2, I think you said was 5 million more. Have there been any details presented to us about the breakdown of that difference there?
I think we've talked about it at facilities and finance and other meetings a number of times. Yeah.
And community meetings.
Yeah.
Okay.
But no decision is
Okay. All
Well,
right, thank you.
One thing I remember from that is if you're building in the front, there was demolition of existing classrooms.
Correct.
My recollection is we
Smaller.
would need 12 modulars to cover that
You
demolition.
need more modulars because you'd be taking students out
Out of
of
those.
the demolished, and then you'd be
Temporarily.
building 12 classrooms as opposed to 6.
So I understand that it's not just a location thing and windows, it is the need for more modulars for a longer period of time, that as I
Temporarily.
recall,
Right.
and then a bigger project than just 4 to 6 classrooms,
Okay.
which changed the pricing.
Okay, great. And you said that was available in some of the presentations in the past? I believe.
I mean, if I know it, we talked about it, I guess,
Okay,
so.
all right. I'll look them up. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Next speaker, Doug, can you call?
Bobby Wong?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I have 2 questions. First thing is my concern about overpopulation.
I'm sorry, where do you live, Mr. Wong?
Kenwood Circle.
Okay.
So my concern is about the growth in population. I don't want to question the demographers, and I'm not an expert, but I want to know, has Lower Merion School District or these demographers looked into the surrounding neighborhood school districts? For example, Swarthmore, Rutledge, to different Radnor, are they also growing? And if that's the case, could that be a trend that impacts us? Because I mean, I'm sure we all have families in different neighborhoods. I have family in Philadelphia, and I know for a fact, as I think Lori mentioned, Philadelphia is booming big time. And a lot of population that's coming down is from New York. So what I hear is that they come into the city, they don't like the city, they then kind of trickle down into the suburbs. And Lower Merion being the closest is naturally where they fall. So my question is, has there been any evaluation into the surrounding neighborhoods, be it an effort to collaborate with them to kind of get a sense of how growth is affecting them also?
We use information that we get from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. They are experiencing some growth, not nearly at the percentage or the numbers of students that Lower Merion is.
Okay. Thank you. And
Sorry. If I could just, I was just going to say that also one of the reasons why we hired the Montgomery County Planning Commission is because they, in fact, have expertise through the county and have done studies in other locations. And so, I mean, one of the reasons why they were people we chose to use was because of sort of their knowledge of the area. But I share your concerns, which is there's some things that are, even as they're incorporating, if you're not, if there's a big movement, like we've seen a movement of students, it's families choosing public schools compared to private schools in this area, right? As that shifted, that's a big shift that nobody could kind of know about until it actually happened.
right, were some collaborative effort to talk to the other school districts, to talk to the private sector, to see if there's also growth in there. Just a quick second question is concerning the partner school program. So is the idea then that after the first year, these students in the partner schools will get trickled back into their home schools, correct?
The policy, the board's policy is quite generous, and the board's policy is space available. They can go to whatever school they want. I mean, not whatever school, they can go back to the home school.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Can you call the next speaker, Doug?
Daniel Maureen Efron?
How you all doing? Good. Just a couple housekeeping
Just
things.
remind us where you
Daniel Maureen
live.
Efron, Wynwood, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
So, a couple things. One is two housekeeping things. Was I don't know, if questions were submitted after the demographers' reports. I mean, I know I submitted 20 or 30, and I don't know. I haven't seen where that has been made public or how the demographers have followed up on those questions. So that's one thing I'd be interested to see if anybody else sent some questions in, if those questions were addressed.
Did you get them returned to you? Did you get your questions answered?
No. So.
Okay, we'll look into it.
Then And the other housekeeping thing is, as we talk about buses and the effect of buses in traffic, more than 2 years ago, I came to the board meeting and have mentioned it before. The Montgomery Planning Commission had been working with the board initially, or the school district, regarding the walkability studies and the money that there is available for those. And I was curious what the status of that, if we have restarted the studies and if we are moving forward to try to find that as a way to improve the walkability and reduce the bus usage around the schools.
I recall that to some extent. Mr. Gannon, I know there were a couple of advisory committees that were working to have conversations around walkability. Can you help us recollect where we landed on that?
We have a couple of, we are participating in cooperative efforts with the Penn Valley Civic Association, which covers Penn Valley School and Welsh Valley School, to look at various issues. It's a group with that has what I would say all the right people on it: the township planning staff, the police, the public works, school, parents, transportation. But we have not engaged Montgomery County Planning Commission. We have a similar group going with Penn Win as well, but we have not engaged them formally to do that.
Because, I mean, there had been initial talks with them, I know, and then it was canceled when the initial talk about expanding the high school. And so I was wondering, it seemed like nobody wanted to have any results around that time, but I'm wondering, well, when's the time that we're going to restart it? And if that's the case, Wynwood was the first ones to actually bring the traffic problems to the forefront, and so I'd love to have a group with the police and everybody to talk about Lower Merion, which is actually the most overcrowded, the most traffic dense, and where there, in my opinion, there have been the most problems. And I see you shaking your head, Ben. So if the statistics are wrong, then I'd be happy to show you my statistics, which I can repeat again. The second most dangerous piece of road by deaths in the township in the last now 13 years is between Schoolhouse Lane and Penn Road, only to be beat by Route 1.
Well, one thing I could just add, I'm not going to address what you just said directly, is we are coordinating a lot more closely with the township commissioners and their staff around kind of transportation and walkability issues. Some of that's been driven by school construction, but independently, a lot of folks throughout the township have come to us saying, can you, traffic calming, walkability, and that's, in many cases, that's something we can't own or implement alone. We have to do it with the township.
I understand it. I've been to the police. I mean, the Sergeant Ruggiero of the traffic department is well versed with the Wynwood Civic. So, but I mean, to my point is, there's money from the Montgomery Planning Commission. If the school board went through with the walkability study with the Montgomery Planning Commission, maybe money could be made available from other sources. So I think that, to me, is the reason to follow up with the Montgomery County Planning Commission. Beyond that, I thought actually the demographers were quite confident as to their numbers, so I'm a little surprised that there seems to be some doubt. I think that it seemed to me that the presentations from 2010 forward were pretty much on the money. So I think that the doubt is a little bit misplaced. I think the growth will continue. As a realtor, nobody called me, but I think realtors tend to have a very specific view of their business, and so I think a broader view is more important. I think to that point, I think if you're talking to the township, I think actually Chris Leswing, we invited him to the Wynwood Civic Association last 2 meetings ago, whatever, and I think he has a very good grasp as to what's happening demographically in the township. And so I think as you work with your committee with the township, I think it might be a wise thing to invite him and give him specific questions to answer, because I think that he has a pretty good grasp. To that point, I think also he really is focused on the rentals, and it seems like a lot of the people are coming from rentals. And so most of the questions that I submitted to the FAQ surrounded the rentals. But I think one overarching thing that I think is really important, and as you look to pay for all these things, and obviously I'm with Save Lmsb, so we're very big supporters of the public schools, is I think that there is there's been conversations, and you've provided data on specifics in each one of the areas. You've talked about enrollment growth and building and the fund balance and all that stuff. But I think that there's still a failure to communicate out in the community. There continues to be this perception that somehow the funds are not being managed correctly, and as much as we have tried in our efforts to change that, we find it difficult. And I think that you should consider one slide, and on that slide, I would simply map the drivers. And from my perception, it's from coming to these meetings, I would like to see something that had student enrollment growth, building expenditures, fund balance, teacher hiring, and the other, if there are other, but I'm guessing those are the large drivers, maybe debt service, and all put on one simple graph where people can actually see what's happening, because I think you have addressed all of these things, but I think when you go to try to explain this to somebody who sees the situation that the school board's under, and then now when we're going to talk about money, right? Because now we're talking about having to build, and so therefore I think that the message is not there, and as much as we've tried to explain it to people, we don't have the data or the time. So I think that if you had a very simplified view of, which and I don't think that would be a bad thing, a clear I think it could be done on one slide, and I would even add PSSA scores or whatever you think is a valid measure of the quality of the education that's being provided, and map those things. I think it would go a long way to making people understand what's happening. And I'm almost done. I see. Finally, though, putting on my Wynwood Civic Association hat, and the comment you made about redistricting, we can't redistrict our way out of this, but redistricting surely will even the load among the schools. And I think that, in my perspective, is one of the concerns, because Lower Merion High School has, for a long time, I mean, I was here when the buses all parked there, and I could hear the beeps in the morning, and has suffered the most and taken on the most burden. And I think that redistricting does actually level things somewhat. And so I think that would be a consideration that I think we should think about. Thanks.
Mr. Efron, before you go, I want to follow up on a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that if you sent questions, we get back to you. I'm not sure, so I'm going to ask Mr. Young to see you before we leave, just to make sure wherever you sent them.
I can refine. I just searched for community comments on my phone, and I found the email.
The other indicate if we missed you for a realtor, you're on the list. We'll come back to get you.
Always happy to help.
Sorry to have not had you.
Okay.
So I want to respond. You talked about, I do remember you coming here about traffic deaths nearby, and I don't doubt that statistic. Your prior sentence, though, was traffic was worse at Lower Merion. And I want to be clear that traffic isn't, while that is a horrific statistic, do not get me wrong, a lot of the other comments we get is, I was stuck at a red light for 10 minutes because of traffic. Nobody died, but you waited 10 minutes. So when we talk about traffic issues, your statistics definitely, but when people throw out traffic and they're not more specific, because traffic is bad in my estimation everywhere. It's bad at different times at this location versus that location versus this over here. So that's all I was shaking my head, like making sure we talk about traffic as traffic.
I'm happy to do that. So we can talk about, and obviously that Montgomery is the busiest one, right? Busier than Lancaster, it's the busiest street. So if you add that then from traffic numbers to all the other streets of all the other schools, then, and I have that analysis, so we can get in depth about it. So I'd be happy. I did this with the traffic department 2 years ago, and I've actually been on top of the township to get a new traffic count outside the high school and the Montgomery County Planning Commission to get a new traffic count.
And so we can talk about, just volume versus deaths, which I think are two
different
different issues.
There's volume, and also, we have officially, I have an email from the police department that says that the intersections around the high school are already above capacity. And I don't think that that's the case at any other school. So
I'm not sure that's true.
I'm sorry.
that's, I mean,
Can
and
I-
I don't want to monopolize any more time on leaving.
I did one more response. I know-
Can we have Mr. Ganand speak to that? Because I know there were a number of traffic studies that were done over the last, several months. I want to make
There
sure
was
we're
also a
relying
traffic
on
study
our
between
administrators.
Harrington and Lower Marion. Do you recall that, in which Harrington
Right,
was
the
actually
traffic
rated worse?
studies are probably roughly 3 years old, so, and I can't remember the details off the top of my head. I don't, so I can't really address the statement about intersections have failed. That wasn't my recollection, but I would have to check.
And I just have one other comment, because the intergovernmental thing, the Board of Commissioners, in their budget this year, set aside, I want to say, and there's ones here, $100,000 for this budget year to make changes of pedestrian safety and bike safety. My understanding, and I'm speaking for them, so if I have it wrong, is they're looking at, it's $100,000, where can they get the most bang for their buck? Building a sidewalk here, get you more walkers. But they're also looking not just at schools, so looking from our input, but could you get more walkers to Suburban Square or to, some other office complex or Whole Foods or whatever. So they're trying to look at a broader picture of improving walkability. I think even bicycling is one of the things. So I do know they're looking at it. But I believe it's just nascent for that group to start chewing into it.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that that's not where it's going to go. That's why I think the Montgomery Planning Commission, if there still are funds, then that's a place where you can get a lot more money.
Thank you for your comments. So though the walkability and traffic piece would certainly be collaborative, and so that's not obviously something that would be initiated on our side beyond our actual properties in terms of traffic in and out.
Well, with the Montgomery Planning Commission, it would be around the property. So that's the initial study that was like, it must be, whenever we started talking about building more classrooms at the high schools, I don't know, 3 years now, I talked to the Montgomery Planning Commission directly, and they told me that Lower Marion High School had initiated a study with them. And then once there was a need to build at the high school, it was stopped. And then it never restarted.
Yeah, I know we've had 2 full demographer reports from Montgomery County Planning Commission, so I don't know if that's something different.
Simply on the walkability issue, totally separate. It's a separate person.
So why don't we
there.
take some time to clarify? I did want to go back to your point around the budget. We had a budget presentation that actually addressed a number of the issues you raised in terms of expenditures, and we're going to have a number of finance meetings forthcoming. We had a full presentation during our last business meeting in February that addressed the very issues that you are speaking to.
I was here and I spoke, and I think that as somebody out in the community who is the #1 cheerleader besides myself and one other person for the public schools, I can tell you that the level of misinformation and the level of complexity of the things that you presented does not get the message across. And so people are not willing to take the time unless I personally sit with them and try to explain it to them. So in the absence of that, I still think that you've contracted a PR company. As I say, I think even one slide that shows those things that I've mentioned would go a long way to kind of explaining to people what is the fact that you are doing a good job, that you are trying to safeguard the education of the children, and that you are using the money wisely and not raising taxes beyond what you need. But I can tell you from being on the brunt end of a lot, people have kind of shifted a lot of their questioning from the board to our group, which is supporting the board. And so as I know certainly the vitriol that comes in here, we've now as defenders of you received some of that ourselves in large quantities. So therefore, since we are not the keepers of the data and we are not the keepers of the information, I guess I'm saying to you as a supporter that I don't think that the level and depth of the data is there, but not an easy way for a casual observer to understand what has been done. And so I'm pleading with you to help us help you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next speaker, please, Doug.
Ben Meyer.
Hello, Ben Meyer from Penwyn. I've got 2 kids that have gone through the system, and one that's a 5th grader, and one's in 9th grade. One's a 5th grader at Penwyn. When this discussion started, he was probably in 3rd grade, so it shows how persistent everybody is on the subject, I guess. And I could see a lot of creativity as well tonight, or heard a lot of creativity tonight from the principals and the members of the board, and looking for, and having searched out a lot of different possibilities, having to take some hardships of using small closet spaces and things like that, and those are very creative too. And I think also the community has tried to be a little bit creative and been helped by the board in terms of putting together different options as well. I've heard from some of the meetings that we've attended that the outdoor space is like a core facility. And from the numbers that Pat and others have gotten for us, Penwyn is the most populated, and we're either the most dense field space per child or the second most dense field space per child. So like Lower Merion as a whole, Penn is sort of a victim of the success of people moving in here. Penwyn, because we're sort of a cheap option for people maybe moving from the city, we're sort of a victim of that success, if you will, of being a reasonable option for people moving into the area. I'll add a small point just to the demographers. I mean, because you hired them, so you hope that they're accurate. You can say that they're on the high side, but the community can say, well, you're probably on the low side. But I'll add just one thing I don't know if they include, though, is there are a lot of families, unfortunately, that get divorced. And in that case, you need 2 houses or 2 apartments, 2 households to support the kids you may have here already. There are a number of people in my neighborhood that are like that. So that may be a force where you could have more housing, but you don't necessarily increase the number of kids if their parents unfortunately get divorced in that case. If we look to the past boards, though, you could say maybe perhaps not when you were here, probably, but maybe they thought too small. They sold off empty schools that would be awfully nice to have right now. And as you know, it's difficult or impossible to get those back once they're sold. So I can feel from your questions that you want to do the right thing at Penwyn, and you've done a lot of research to find out, that it may cost $5 million more for option 2A, which we definitely prefer over 1C. And I speak for the Penwyn Civic Association. I'm on that subcommittee, and we've also spoken with the HSA at Penwyn and the leaders there, and been to those meetings, and pretty much unanimously to support option 2A over putting it on the field. And 2A includes the addition off the field, but it also includes a very nice drop-off at the front of the school, which allows the buses to drop off more efficiently and keep them out of the walk zone because they can turn around down away from the walk zone, basically. So really, you've heard me before, and I don't want to belabor it, but we'd like to preserve the field with option 2. If it means an extra year of study to get better data, which it sounds like from the slide 2018, you have another year of study you could do. Maybe something will change in the elementary school numbers. We don't know, but anyway, we ask you to. Just like you use the creativity for all these options to use it to try to find that money, which is hard to find, but it's a one-time cost. It's not going to repeat itself over and over like many costs do that you have to face, but this is just a one-time cost. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Shelby Sparrow.
Hi, thanks. I guess my first question.
Just remind us where you live,
Shelby Sparrow in Penwyn. I live in Penwyn and have 2 children at the elementary school. And one is a 5th grader, so we'll be headed to Ballackinwood Middle School. And that leads me to my first question that isn't nearly as big picture as a lot of these other conversations have been. But can you go over the I know there are going to be some expansions at Ballackinwood this fall. modulars, I think. Can you go over what the campus is going to look like, both from a physical perspective, and then there was a brief conversation about possible program changes or effects on the team structure. Have any decisions been made about that?
In terms of next year, what we're going to be proposing is putting in 6 modular classrooms on the not on the track, but on the track side of the building. We are looking at, the board hasn't made a final decision, but we're also looking at the possibility of expanding the cafeteria at Bala Cynwyd Middle School. Not only just for seating arrangements for students, but also to improve the service area so that they're not waiting in very long lines. So that's basically what we're looking to do next year.
Okay. And will that allow for the team structure to stay intact?
It will. It will. Mr. Potton was shaking his head up and down like that.
Okay. Okay, good. That's what I want. Thank you.
And there is a full presentation on that, and I don't recall the exact date of the meeting, but if you're interested in the details, it was, I want to say,
Jason,
2 months ago.
it was in the fall when you did it here, correct? I'm going to say November, December, November?
Yeah.
November, December.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. My next question, just as I was thinking about the different elementary schools, are there any studies that show overall, I know class size, specific class size is, maintaining a small class size is a high priority, and obviously that has a great effect on the type of education that we have in Lower Merion. Are there any studies that talk about the overall school size? Because I know, just as, a mom in the hall, an elementary school that has 500 has a very different feel than one that has 800, especially like at Penn Wynn. We're not at 800. I don't want to jump the gun there. But, it's just when a school is sort of busting at the seams, and the staff and the teachers do a tremendous job, but when you just have so many children in the cafeteria at one time, everybody using their indoor voices suddenly is booming. And, and it's harder to sort of control. Transition times take longer just because of sheer numbers and lack of space also. So are there any, I just thought of it now, obviously, or I would have been Googling it myself. If there are any studies, if there's been any discussion in terms of school size, if we're talking about not adding another elementary school but adding on, how does that actually affect, the level of education? Do you know what am I asking this properly? Okay. I don't know if there's anything out there or if you guys have discussed it.
Most of the research on school size has to do with high schools. Mm-hmm. There is some on elementary schools, but there's not a lot. I think one of the reasons is most of the elementary schools, students are in self-contained classes. So once they're in the classroom, that's where they spend most of their day. Certainly there are, I think most people that I would talk to would prefer not having large elementary schools. I did visit the Central Bucks District at one time, and they have very large elementary schools, and they like their very large elementary schools. So I think, but you can Google it. There's clearly people who have a bias towards small schools, and they've got research that suggests it's better. And you'd have to decide whether you think it's really accurate or not. But I would hasten to add, I don't think anybody here necessarily wants to have large elementary schools. The question is, what are some of the solutions and what are some of the results of those decisions? That's all.
If I could just add, we've had a lot of discussion about that, what that means culturally, and also many or some of your neighbors have come to the board and raised that as an issue. And so it's something that I think we're all really mindful of. We're not just thinking about numbers and buildings, but how, you know, how to manage this and how it could change the culture of the school. And I think one thing we're really trying to do is continue and support the culture in the school within the growth we have to deal with. But I just wanted to reassure you that it's something we're all very familiar with, and, you know, Lower Merion Township has a legacy and a history of a lot of smaller neighborhood elementary schools, and that's appealing for many reasons. So we think about that a lot when we talk about these choices.
And I would also add that these conversations are not new conversations. So we've, you know, we've increased, you know, Gladwin, another one of the larger schools, we added on at Gladwin. This was a really big discussion there. It was also a big discussion with Penn Valley. So it's, you know, and it's been a discussion around, you know, even then again at the middle schools and the high schools, right? Because like we were just saying, you know, do you want middle schools that are the same size as your high schools? You know, I think that you know, most of us would say, no, that's not what we really want. And I do think the administration's done a really nice job with the whole teaming concept, particularly, you know, at the middle and now into the high schools. And I think, you know, just, you know, from my own personal experience, I think that's, you know, it's made a big difference to the experience of middle school and even now 9th and 10th grade, which is, you know, your kids have a certain set of teachers and you're interacting with that particular set. So you know, I think there are a lot of concerns on as they get bigger, if that's the direction, you know, we're going to have to go at some level, you know, how do you mitigate that? But yeah, I just, again, sort of assuring we've been talking a lot about this. It's yeah.
Good. If I could just add one more thing. Ben, your neighbor Ben, was kind enough to send us a bunch of the research he did, and we have all looked at those references that we could find out there regarding this issue at the elementary level.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanya Schreiber.
Hi, I'm Tanya Schreiber from Penwyn Civic Association. And first of all, I want to thank you guys. This is really amazing. I've had the good fortune with my flexible schedule to be able to speak with quite a bit of you and have these type of dialogues during the Thursday morning meetings. And I really have learned so much and had so many questions answered. And I'm just so delighted to see people who are working and with their kids or whatever have this opportunity during an evening meeting to have this type of Q&A without a buzzer going off in 120 seconds. So that said, thank you. I understand the concern if we end up without enough classrooms, but I remember last year when we were waiting for the next set of studies, we were reassured that the reason it was worth the wait was because both demographers hired had their margin of error was less than 1%. That once we got these numbers, we were going to be plus or minus 10 kids on this 1,000 plus that are going to get added. They told us we could be that safe. We were reassured. But okay, let's say they're wrong. Let's say they're wrong by 100 kids. Again, it would really ruin their reputation. But when it comes to Penwyn, the demographer said that only 12 of the students from the new development would land in Penwyn. We're in the wrong area. If you're going to hedge your bets by building, you got to go to the other corner. You can't put more classrooms down here in that little dot that's covered in black already. That bare area and the purple area above it, that's where the growth is supposed to be. And if you're going to hedge your bets and you're worried about busing and you're worried and you don't want to cut down on redistricting, you can't put your extra capacity all the way down there in that really crowded little spot. Now, as I looked at the schools, because somebody has, I mean, if you want to be conservative, if you want to hedge your bets, if you have the money available to build just in case, I went and I looked and tried to find the acreage per student for just the elementaries. I know the middles are tight, the high schools are tight, but we're talking about little kids who run and play, and that's they need that physical break. Gladwin and Penn Valley have different zoning. The impervious surface is different. So we have Gladwin with 13 acres, 731 kids. Penn Valley, 14 acres, 667 kids. After that, we have about 100 kids an acre. Belmont Hills, 5 acres, 485 kids. Penwyn, 7 acres, 738 kids. Kinwood Elementary, I combined with the middle school because they have 14 acres, and between them they have 1,462 kids on those 14 acres right now. And then there's Marion, which has already been expanded to have 2 gyms, I believe, or is it 2 cafeterias? 10 acres, 611 kids. That's right in the middle of the purple. If you want to hedge your bets, there's 2 huge fields, flat, in the middle of our township that we own. Above it, a purple zone that's busing. If you have a busing issue, that becomes a walk zone to that school. I'm fine. If it's funny, then I need to understand why. Why can't we take those big flat fields at Marion and get them to the same size? I'm not even saying exceed. Can they become the same size as Penwyn and Gladwin? Because it's literally in the middle of all 6. And they would be prepared. If we ever needed to redistrict or partner school, we would have the capacity where absolutely any school except Gladwin would be able to access it.
I think your recommendation is to build onto Marion.
No, I'm asking if you could look into it or if anyone has ever looked into it. It's been coming up for a couple of years, but I'm asking if anyone has ever explored the possibility of building at Marion Elementary.
Yeah, we did that, and Pat, we looked at what it would take, and it was also, the core space was a problem at Marion too, wasn't it?
Don't they have more core space than Penwyn?
Could he just?
Sorry.
I don't believe they do when you look at things like cafeteria. In other words, you talk about things that keep you up at night. When I think about more kids showing up at Marion, that's one of the things that bothers me, is because their cafeteria is pretty small. There's no easy way to add on to that cafeteria. We have looked at adding classrooms. We've looked at adding 4 classrooms. We've looked at adding 8 classrooms. We've looked at adding temporary classrooms, et cetera. And we're still looking at the same kind of numbers. The numbers don't change from one site to another.
So they're equivalent? I'm sorry, they're equivalent to the Penwyn numbers?
No, I'm talking about the cost estimates to build on.
That's great.
Okay? But in fact, the Marion site is only 1 acre larger than the Penwyn site.
So they could accommodate the same number of students Penwyn currently has?
They have some other challenges, though. While Penwyn has streets that go all the way around it, Marion does not. Marion does not have a large parking lot like Penwyn does. So each site has its own challenges, and they have to be investigated.
I guess that I'm asking, can we investigate Marion, whether it's possible to put a loop in the back, parking in the back, since there is an impervious, they have more impervious surface available? Can we explore that before we cramp Penwyn anymore?
I mean, I can't, I apologize. I don't have the Marion Elementary laid out in my head to know. I've been there a handful of times, not enough. But if we have existing playing fields, we are struggling with it. I'm going to go back to Ballackinwood Middle School. There's some cheat space, but if you take too much, you lose like a soccer field, right? You can't take out a corner of a soccer field and have a full soccer field. So I'm trying to get in my head how much loss of athletic space Marion would have, we would lose, play space. I just haven't been there enough to know for that trade-off.
I know. I guess what I'm asking is, it sounds like we have 18 months before we have to do this. Penwyn has 1 flat field in the back, 1 hill in the front. Marion has a huge flat field in the back and a huge flat field on the side. There aren't any, there's the space. And if it gets explored and you guys say, no, we have to get Penwyn at 800, and we've looked at the demographers' reports and it doesn't matter. But I want to know that we've explored that land, that you guys can talk comfortably about it before we do this to Penwyn.
I think what Mr. Gannon was saying is he did look at the impact of expansion at Marion.
Right, we have. We've looked at it.
And you said that it would be the equivalent cost.
It would be the equivalent cost. The question, and this is beyond my purview, is where are the students going to come from to go to the school if we add on to the school? There are some significant architectural challenges trying to add on to the cafeteria, for one thing. And there are parking and traffic challenges there.
Right. I guess, I'm not sure, what year was Marion looked at?
Probably in the last 2 years. 2016, he says, yeah.
I know that it hasn't been, I haven't heard it at a facilities meeting. I don't think I've missed any in the last 2 years. But I guess if it was looked at before, I would just like them to be compared side to side, now that it looks like push come to shove with Penwyn. It just seems like, it's right next to it. But I'm beating a dead horse now. I would love to see whatever research you've done, I would love to see it myself then.
Okay, we've done presentations on it, Glenn.
Anyone else to provide public comment? So thank you for participating this evening. Thank the board and the administration for a productive dialogue. Ms. Acme, you had a question.
I just wanted to make a comment in relation to the conversation we were just having. One piece of context, Tanya, I just wanted you to know is I think as a board, we've really tried to support and the neighborhood schools are really important in this community. And so when we're looking at building onto schools, generally we're trying to allow everyone in the neighborhood to attend that school. And so when we're talking about building onto schools that aren't in the neighborhood to accommodate growth in that neighborhood, it means that some kids are going to be sent out of the neighborhood. And so there's just a lot of factors involved in where we're expanding schools, and we hear from a lot of families that are in Penwyn that they love being part of that community, and they don't necessarily want to see themselves taken to another school. So there's a lot of competing interests here in terms of what you're talking about.
And
I just wanted to let you know that.
And I just think maybe we can, I know last year there were over 200 people who requested exceptions to their catchment assignment. I'm just asking if maybe, if the redistricting might ask for volunteers. Okay, between Lancaster and Haverford, there's a lot of black dots. If you invite the people in between those two, would they mind? And then you just see how many volunteers do you get. Then you're not doing a hard redistricting. You're asking for volunteers for the partner program.
Can you want to point out on the map? I'm trying to pull it.
Is that number, where does that number come from? 200 people requested?
I can't, somebody, during one phone call somewhere, somebody said there was about 200 requests last year. I don't remember
Megan,
why.
does that
I'm not familiar with that number at all, and I just would like us to be really cautious about, putting that information out there that we can't necessarily fact check at the board table.
No problem. If you, I'll ask if somebody can send me the updated
I'm not familiar
number.
with that at all.
I think that'd be a valuable piece of data. Let's find out how many catchment exceptions are requested every year.
But remember, I mean, if assuming even 100 kids change high school catchment, that changes nothing with Penwyn.
No. But we can, I think.
Do you understand my question?
Yes, so let's get the numbers. And
We can't pull it up right now.
Oh, no, not tonight, but maybe by next month.
No. Okay.
Let me just.
You want to speak to it?
No, I wanted to speak to something else that had just happened in my mind. Mr. Efron was talking about, I don't know if it's any simpler about the budget, but there is going to be a video that's going to come out. It's 10 minutes long, something like that, where we try to encapsulate some of the budget issues in that. So that's going to be coming out pretty soon. But I would also really encourage people to either come or view the separate finance committee meetings. We have talked about those other kinds of things in terms of a simplistic, or tried to make them as simplistic and transparent as we possibly can. But sometimes accuracy doesn't always trump talking points. but we will do the best we can.
I didn't mean to. Okay, before someone else mics up, thank you for coming. We are adjourned.